Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today we're returning to Panzer Corps. This is a series that is in part 8 now, and we are on to the invasion of France. We've successfully taken and conquered Poland, Norway, the Low Countries, so Belgium and Holland, and we successfully drove the French and the British to the Channel ports and cut them off in what would become the Battle of Dunkirk. We are now on to the final attempt to subjugate the French people, and that is the drive on Paris and the final conquest of France. We're in the earlier parts of this scenario. We're only on turn 2, and we've got a little bit of a ways to go. The video here is taken from a live stream that occurred, over a month ago now, I think it is, and I'm still working my way through this. Now, again, because it was taken from a live stream, it does include audio and the like, but I did want to go ahead and talk about a slightly different topic in this video, so I'm actually editing over the original commentary, because I had something I wanted to kind of ask you guys about, see what you thought, and also kind of share my viewpoint. I've been listening to I don't know what to call it. I guess it's a lecture series by The Great Courses, which I don't know how many of you are familiar with The Great Courses, but in essence, The Great Courses is a company that puts out lectures on a wide variety of topics. So they've got, like 18 hours worth of Civil War lectures given by Professor Gallagher, I think is his name, who's an expert on the American Civil War, and he talks about the war from its inception to its conclusion. They've got topics on Rome, topics on World War II, Nazi Germany, modern-day politics, Otto von Bismarck, the French Revolution, a whole slew of them. Essentially, they used to be books on tape, but they were lectures on tape. The idea was get a professor to create a series that talks about a topic in lecture format. So it's kind of like iTunes U before that existed. And a lot of them used to be tapes and DVDs and whatnot, but now they're available on Audible. And they're really interesting series. They give you more of a superficial look at history. They're not going to delve deep, into kind of really, I don't know what to say other than into deep history, other than, kind of like a pop level, like a survey level course that gets you into a topic. But with that being said, I am listening currently to one of their series on World War I, which is something like 30-ish lectures on World War I. Each is a half an hour. But the piece I wanted to talk about in this video was the lecturer brought up something kind of interesting, something that I hadn't really thought of before, and I don't think we usually think of when we think of World War I and World War II. And what he was talking about was the fact that some historians today are arguing that not now, probably not even in 100 years, but in a couple hundred years, 300, 400, 500 years, historians may well look back on World War I and World War II and essentially label them as one sort of combined conflict with a brief interlude. And on the face of it, that seems absurd, right? I know some historians have made this argument, but it just seems kind of ridiculous to say that World War I, a conflict between Imperial Germany, declining Austro-Hungarian Empire, Imperial France and Britain, and then Tsarist Russia, would be in any way tied to the, communist Russia, fascist Germany, fascist Italy, democratic France and Britain that are borderline starting to decolonize or on that path. It seems a little bit absurd. I mean, obviously the history between the conflicts is linked. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt that there wasn't a wide period of time between the conflicts. And yet, the more I thought about it, the more I thought maybe he has a point. And not necessarily because the conflicts really are one conflict, but that because when we look back on history from a distance, we look for meaning in places, we try to understand things, and there's no doubt that the two conflicts were linked. We do this all the time. We group conflicts, complex, intertwined conflicts together. This isn't a new concept. And I'm sure that's where he's talking about, certain historians are saying that this is something they think will happen. And they're starting to write in that vein and trying to say, is there a way that we can link these conflicts because, one certainly led to the other, or the result of one certainly had impacts on the other, is there a bigger narrative here? And I think the answer may be yes. If we look at the 100 Years' War between France and Britain, the conflicts are obviously, mainly over certain territory. And a brief interlude here, I apologize to anyone if you did hear me yawn or anything like that. I'm recording this at like 1 in the morning. It's been a crazy couple of weeks. We just bought our first place. We started moving some things in, haven't fully moved in yet. Work has been crazy and dealing with a lot of stuff. I'm pretty exhausted, but I wanted to get this out on audio while it was in my head. So if there's a yawn here or there, I apologize. But getting back into the topic at hand. So if we look back at conflicts in the past, the 100 Years' War, for example, conflict between Britain and France, I'm by no means an expert, but it wasn't one constant. First of all, it was more than 100 years. Second of all, it wasn't one constant war. There was war, peace, war, peace, war, peace, and I assume some of these conflicts broke out over different reasons than the first one. But again, I'm not a huge expert in the subject. If we look at the 30 Years' War in the Franco-German area, that war was clearly fought between different religious beliefs and backgrounds within those territories. But it wasn't, again, my understanding is it wasn't one specific kingdom fighting against one other kingdom. It was a conflict that evolved over time, brought in more partners, dropped other partners out. Again, very complicated. And then I think where the real parallel can be made is the Napoleonic Wars. So on the face of it, the Napoleonic Wars are very different because you've got one ruler in France, Napoleon, fighting against a whole slew of rulers in Europe over a 20-year time frame or so. And that's different than World War II or World War I, because World War I, the regimes and the participants in the conflict were very different than in World War II. And yet, we seem to link these Napoleonic Wars with the French Revolutionary Wars, which came before it. Now, admittedly, when we talk about the history of the French Revolution and Napoleon, I think most professors or most history teachers or most history books do a good job of delineating the conflict. But if we remember, the Napoleonic conflicts are only just over 200 years old. So they're relatively recent in the span of human history. If we're talking about, the 100 Years' War, we're talking double that time frame, if not a little bit more. Yeah, in fact, a little bit more. So again, these are still relatively recent when compared to some other conflicts. But we still link them pretty darn closely. We talk about the French Revolution, we talk about the overthrow of the monarchy, and then we talk about how Europe came in to try and protect the monarchy. That leads directly into the first coalition against France. In fact, the whole concept of the coalitions is not a list of conflicts specifically against Napoleon. Again, we've got the first coalition against France, which lasts from 1792 to 1797. At that time, Napoleon was certainly a central figure in France. He became one because of these wars. But he was by no means, he was a peon when the first coalition started. It was a coalition against revolutionary France. The second coalition, likewise, was a coalition against revolutionary France. Napoleon's stature was greatly enhanced. In fact, he would become dictator, I believe the timing of that works out, during the war of the second coalition. But again, when war was waged, it was a war on revolutionary France. It was not a war specifically on Napoleon. And then you have a couple of years, and the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh coalitions are all clearly wars against Napoleonic France. But between 1792 and 1815, you have a 23-year period of constant warfare in Europe, either wars against French revolutionaries or wars against French Napoleonics and Republicans. And so, well, Republicans and revolutionaries are the same, but anyway. So you have this series of conflicts, which has largely become known as the Napoleonic Wars. But it doesn't strictly delineate it had to occur after Napoleon took power. two-sevenths of those wars occurred before Napoleon was in power. And so you already see this grouping of history. Now, the spread of years is very much different. The First and Second Coalition only had about a 3-year gap before the first purely anti-Napoleon coalition of the Third Coalition, which was in 1805. So you're not talking about a 22-year gap, but you are talking about gaps here and there. And so it is worth mentioning that this series of conflicts largely becomes known as one conflict. This revolutionary France that ends up fighting against Europe to protect its revolution, and then the conflict morphs into a dictatorship struggling against the rest of Europe and attempting to subjugate the rest of Europe for the glory of France. And so there is this precedent set of this linking of multiple conflicts, in some cases having nothing to do with each other, being transformed and being lumped into a single conflict. And so the question is, can World War II see that happen? Now, the first answer is maybe. With enough time, surely anything can happen. We don't really delineate between the wars of, well, I suppose even to this day we delineate between the wars of Rome. But there were a lot of civil wars, and we kind of teach them as Rome's, civil wars during the whole Pompey, Caesar time frame. I'm just trying to think if, and I'm kind of ad-libbing off the spot, if there's another precedent for this. Again, Napoleon was very close together. The 100 Years' War were presumably fought for slightly different reasons, although at the end of the day, it largely all came down to the power of the British crown versus the power of the French crown, and who had overall authority over the other, if anyone. The Crusades are kind of taught as one piece of history. They don't, you don't hear a ton about the First and Second Crusades. You hear about the initial Crusades. Sometimes you hear a little bit about the Third Crusade because of some of the figures that were involved, Saladin on the Middle Eastern and Arabic end, and you've got Richard the Lionhearted on the European end, and the rest of the Crusade just kind of vape away into obscurity to a large degree, with the exception of the Fourth for different reasons. And so we kind of lump crusading Europe into one category. So I think the actual answer, now that I think about it, the answer may not be that we're going to lump World War I and World War II into a single conflict, although we certainly could from a historical memory perspective. But perhaps the 20th century will be lumped as one era. Again, this is talking probably 500-600 years out, so what's the point of this discussion? I don't know, but it's fun to muse. But if we're talking about, how history will be taught, and if we're talking about how things may be viewed differently or in a different lens, I think you could make the argument that the 20th century was the struggle of totalitarian regimes and dictatorship against the regimes of democracy. You see that in the First World War. That wasn't what the war was about per se, and low warning to anybody who claims Britain was the free and just empire, given that everything that was inherent with their own imperialism. But then you have the same thing in World War II, where you've got tyrannical Germany and tyrannical Italy, less tyrannical but still tyrannical Italy, against the beacons of democracy, against still imperialistic powers. And then you've still got to ask the question about Russia, and then the Cold War, where you have this very clear view of Europe, Western Europe, and the United States, the havens of freedom and democracy versus again the tyrannical communist ideology and regime. So at the end of the day, I think an easier case is made to lump the 20th century and the various conflicts that occurred during the Cold War in with World War II and in with World War I as some higher level, less defined conflict. If you're looking at just World War I and World War II, I think things become a little bit more difficult, though I suppose, given that the Versailles Treaty in World War I and the way that Germany perceived themselves as not really being beaten in World War I could theoretically directly lead into World War II, I suppose. I think it's an interesting one worth discussing. This may be a terrible video. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. It's just my kind of brainstorming on like how we think about our past. And I do think it's fair to say that with time, we simplify, we group things together, we look for shared meaning across complicated and diverse topics. And that will probably be no different when we're long gone. How that affects us, well, who knows? I mean, that's not really... I guess this is just me kind of spitballing and brainstorming on stuff that doesn't matter for any of us, but it's still interesting to think about. And I guess I'm interested what you guys think, if this is even a worthy topic for discussion. With that being said, I know it's running a little bit shorter than, you know, a lot of the videos that I do for this series run, but nonetheless, I am going to go ahead and end it there. I'll ask you guys to post in the comments and let me know your thoughts. We will finish up the invasion of France and the conquest of Paris in our next video. So you can see here we are well on our way to driving south into the heart of Paris. We've broken through the French front lines. We're driving into the French hinterlands, and now it's just a question of capturing all the important objectives before time expires, whether we'll be able to obtain a major victory or whether we will have to, you know, settle for a minor victory. In our last battle, we won a minor victory. So the invasion of Britain, if not impossible, is unlikely. Barring a major victory here, it is for sure impossible. And while I'm off to a good start, I wouldn't say I'm off to a major victory start. I think I've got like 9 more turns to take all the objectives, and I'm starting to move rapidly, but probably not rapidly enough. So we may see this conflict shift east if I fail to take my objectives. Although, you know, spoiler alert, there's another 7+ hours of footage from this series before it gets to caught up. So, you know, there's a ways to go still without saying exactly what's going to happen. You may have already seen the streams. Anyway, guys, let me know your thoughts about kind of my musings around, you know, the First and Second World War, if it makes sense to lump them in together, if it doesn't, if it's something that you think we will overly simplify and teach as sort of the same lesson of history, or if I'm off base here, and you know, feel free to share that with me as well. Until next time, oh wow, I can't speak tonight. Until next time, guys, I appreciate you for tuning in and continuing to support the channel. It really does mean a lot to me. You know, I do this because I enjoy it, and I hope to continue to do it and continue to enjoy it. But it certainly, you know, makes it easier to continue these kinds of projects and endeavors when you've got the kind of support that you guys have shown to me, and I really appreciate that. I do have a few things on hand that I'm working on. I've got 3 series ideas that would require a lot of work, a lot of editing time. It's probably beyond my skill level, and I will fall dramatically short. But I'm working on 3 separate project ideas, or at least I have in my head 3 separate project ideas. One's much further along in the ideation session, or in the ideation process, than the others, that I'd like to start rolling out. Almost sort of Ken Burnsian documentary style history with gaming mixed in. You know, with wargaming and other sorts of historical gaming mixed in, to provide color. So mixing between photos and more kind of concrete history type stuff with a more formalized historical discussion and narrative, but also utilizing video games to fill in some of the gaps, to provide some visuals, to make the history really come to life. So that's something I'm excited to do. I am a little bit self-conscious of my own abilities. I don't feel like I'm very talented with this. I'm sure I'm not, but you won't get better if you don't try. So I will put my effort into them, make him a lot more well-crafted and versed than what I've got going here. But you know, I as always, when that does come out, I appreciate all of your feedback. To End All Wars is still coming with XTRG and Tortuga. We need to get that started, but we will. War in the Pacific with Belugan is still occurring. Actually, that is one of the series that I'm looking at putting a little bit more work into. So I'm still playing the series. I just, you know, I'm probably going to upload once a game week or so and have updates there when I do, you know, take the approach that I intend to take. But anyway, guys, that's enough of me rambling about things that I have not yet done but would like to do. I'm sure we could all talk about those kind of things for hours and hours on end, ideally around a campfire with some good friends and a couple of good drinks. But alas, that is enough for tonight. Once again, guys, and I think this is like the third time I'm saying this, but once again, I appreciate everybody tuning in. Feel free to leave your thoughts below, and until next time, guys, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.